Hey buddy, welcome back to the channel. Today's story comes straight from Reddit, and honestly, I would have handled it differently if I were this guy. What about you? Let's break it down. I still remember the exact moment my stomach dropped, like missing a step in the dark. It was a Friday afternoon at our office in Chicago, the kind where everyone pretends to work but is really just waiting for the weekend. Our CEO, Richard Halvorson, had called an all-hands meeting. That usually meant one thing: bonuses. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who counts chickens before they hatch. But after the year I'd put in, late nights, canceled vacations, and one project that practically glued me to my chair for 3 straight months, I figured I'd done enough to earn something meaningful. Not life-changing money, but at least recognition. We all gathered in the glass conference room, sunlight bouncing off the skyline like it had something to prove. My coworker, Ethan Briggs, sat across from me, grinning like he already knew something the rest of us didn't. Ethan was good, I won't deny that. But he also had a talent for being in the right place at the right time and making sure the right people noticed. Richard started speaking, going on about an extraordinary year and team effort. You've heard the speech before. We all have. Then came the envelopes. One by one, names were called. Ethan Briggs. He stood up, smooth as ever, adjusted his tie, and walked up to the front. Richard shook his hand a little longer than usual, a detail I didn't miss. Ethan opened the envelope right there, like he wanted an audience. His eyebrows shot up. Then he laughed. 55,000, he said, not even trying to keep it down. The room shifted. A couple of people clapped. Someone whistled. I felt something twist in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. Maybe, I thought, they were scaling bonuses this year. Maybe mine would be close. Then my name was called. I walked up, shook Richard's hand. Quick, firm, nothing special, and took my envelope back to my seat. For a second, I didn't open it. I wanted to stretch that moment of possibility just a little longer. Then I did. $4,200. I stared at the number, waiting for it to make sense. It didn't. I read it again. Same number. 4,200. I could feel the room buzzing around me, but it sounded distant, like I was underwater. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Had there been a mistake? A missing zero? I glanced back at Ethan. He was already texting someone, probably celebrating. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This was exactly what they thought I was worth. I folded the paper slowly, slipped it back into the envelope, and leaned back in my chair. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady. Too steady. That kind of calm. It doesn't come from peace. It comes right before a decision that changes everything. I didn't storm out. That would have been too easy, too predictable. Instead, I stayed. I sat through the rest of that meeting in our glass box, overlooking downtown Chicago, nodding at the right moments, even forcing a half smile when Richard wrapped up his speech about shared success. Inside, though, something had already shifted. It wasn't anger boiling over, not yet. It was colder than that. Sharper. After the meeting, people gathered in little clusters, comparing numbers in hushed voices or not so hushed, depending on how proud they felt. Ethan was the center of his own orbit, laughing, clapping backs, already planning what he was going to do with his $55,000. Hey man, he called out when he saw me. You do okay? There it was. That casual tone, like we were equals in this moment. Yeah, I said, slipping the envelope into my jacket. Not bad. I don't know why I said that. Maybe pride. Maybe I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Or maybe I was still trying to convince myself it didn't matter. He nodded, like that confirmed something for him. Good. You earned it. That almost made me laugh. I spent the next hour pretending to work, staring at my screen while numbers and emails blurred together. My mind kept replaying the same question. What did Ethan do that I didn't? Because here's the thing. I knew exactly what I'd done. I'd led the Denver rollout when everything was falling apart. I'd stayed up until 2 a.m., fixing issues that weren't even in my job description. I'd covered for teammates, trained new hires, and hit every deadline they threw at me. And Ethan? He showed up to the right meetings. He knew how to talk. He knew how to make Richard feel like the smartest guy in the room. By 5:30, most people had cleared out. The office felt different, quieter, like the building itself was exhaling. I shut down my computer, grabbed my coat, and headed for the elevator. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. No big speech. No confrontation. I just knew I wasn't coming back. That decision settled over me with a strange kind of relief, like setting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out into the cold evening air. Chicago in late fall has a bite to it, sharp enough to wake you up, not enough to numb you. I took a few steps toward the street when I heard it behind me. Hey, hold up. I turned. It was Richard. Our CEO didn't usually run. But there he was, slightly out of breath, coat half-buttoned, like he'd come down in a hurry. Got a minute? He asked. I looked at him, really looked this time. For the first time all day, I felt something close to anger push through that calm surface. Sure, I said. We stepped off to the side, near the big glass windows of the lobby. People passed by outside, heading home, living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just tilted in a new direction. Richard adjusted his tie, buying himself a second. Listen, he started. I wanted to talk about your bonus. Of course he did. I crossed my arms, waiting. We had to make some strategic decisions this year, he continued. Different roles, different impacts. $4, 200, I said, cutting him off. Not loud, just precise. He paused. Yes, he said. And I understand if that feels. It doesn't feel like anything, I said. It tells me everything I need to know. That caught him off guard. I could see it. This isn't just about numbers, he said quickly. You're a valuable part of this company. I almost smiled at that. Valuable? Am I? I asked. For a moment, he didn't answer. And in that silence, my decision locked into place. I won't be in on Monday, I said. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. A flicker of something real. Let's not make any quick decisions, he said. Why don't you come in tomorrow? We can sit down, talk this through properly. Tomorrow. Saturday. The CEO was asking me to come in on a weekend. I studied his face, wondering what had shifted so suddenly. Because a man doesn't run out of a building for someone he just undervalued, unless he realizes, a little too late, what he might lose. I'll think about it, I said. And then I walked out into the night, leaving him standing there behind the glass. I didn't plan on going in that Saturday. By the time I got home to my apartment on the north side of Chicago, I had already convinced myself it was over. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, loosened my tie, and just stood there for a minute, staring at nothing. The city lights flickered through the window, reflecting off the glass like 1,000 quiet reminders that life kept moving, whether you were ready or not. I poured myself a drink. Not to celebrate, not even to relax, just to have something in my hand while my brain tried to make sense of the day. For $1,200. I said it out loud this time, like maybe hearing it would change something. It didn't. I sat down on the couch and replayed the year in my head, not the highlight reel, but the gritty parts. The nights when I ordered takeout at my desk because going home felt like a waste of time. The weekends I told myself, just a few hours, that turned into entire days. The calls I took while standing in grocery store aisles, pretending it was normal. And the thing is, no one asked me to do all that. Not directly, but they didn't stop me either. That's how it works, doesn't it? You give a little extra, hoping someone notices. Then a little more. Then suddenly, that extra becomes expected. Invisible. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and exhaled slowly. Don't go in tomorrow, I told myself. It would just be another conversation. Another round of corporate language dressed up as concern. We value you. Let's find a path forward. This is just how the structure works. I'd heard it all before. My phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I picked it up. 3 missed calls. 1 message. From Richard Halvorsen. I know it's late. I'd really appreciate it if you came in tomorrow. There are things we need to discuss. Things I can't put in writing. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Things I can't put in writing. That was new. CEOs don't say things like that unless something's off. Not just a little off, structurally off. I set the phone down, but now my mind wouldn't settle. What could possibly be so important that it couldn't wait until Monday? Or worse, what had I been part of without even realizing it? I got up and paced the apartment, the wood floor creaking under each step. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to stick to the clean break I'd already decided on. Walk away with whatever dignity I had left. But another part, the part that had stayed late, fixed problems, carried weight that wasn't mine, that part needed answers. And I hate loose ends. I didn't sleep much that night. When I did, it was shallow, restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number again. for $1,200. Like it was burned into the back of my mind. By 7 a.m., I was already awake, staring at the ceiling. I could have stayed in bed, could have rolled over, silenced my phone, and let the whole thing fade into something I used to care about. Instead, I got up, showered, shaved, put on the same kind of shirt I'd worn every weekday for the past year. Habit is a powerful thing. By 8:30, I was back outside, the morning air colder than the night before. The streets were quieter, weekend quiet. Fewer cars, fewer people. Like the city itself was giving me space to think. As I walked toward the office building, I kept asking myself one question. What could he possibly say that would change anything? I didn't have an answer, but I still swiped my badge at the entrance. The lobby was almost empty. No chatter, no movement, just the faint hum of lights and distant ventilation. The kind of silence that makes every step feel louder than it should. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, the floor was dark except for one section, the executive wing. And there, through the glass walls, I saw him. Richard was already waiting, not sitting, standing. Something fell off the second I stepped into the executive wing. The lights were too bright for a Saturday. Not the usual dim, energy-saving glow. Everything was fully lit, like they were expecting more than just a quiet conversation. The glass walls reflected my own movement back at me as I walked toward Richard Halvorsen, and for a brief second, I barely recognized the guy staring back. He looked done, not tired, not frustrated. Done. Richard didn't greet me with his usual polished smile. No firm handshake, no good to see you. Just a short nod. Glad you came, he said. His voice was different too, less rehearsed, more human. Yeah, I replied. You said it couldn't wait. He gestured toward his office. Let's sit. I followed him in, closing the door behind me. The room smelled faintly of coffee and something else, stress, maybe. Papers were spread across his desk, not neatly stacked like usual. That alone told me this wasn't business as usual. I didn't sit right away. Let's skip the part where you tell me I'm valuable, I said. What's going on? For a moment, he just looked at me, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he exhaled. You ever get the feeling, he began slowly, that something doesn't add up, even when all the numbers look right? I frowned. You're going to have to be more specific. He gave a small, humorless smile. I figured. He walked over to his desk, picked up a folder, and held it for a second before handing it to me. Open it. I did. Inside were printouts, spreadsheets, emails, internal reports. At first glance, it looked like the kind of stuff I dealt with every day. But the deeper I looked, the stranger it got. Numbers repeated where they shouldn't. Budget allocations that didn't match project scopes. Approval signatures that didn't make sense. My eyes narrowed. What am I looking at? Richard leaned against the edge of his desk. The reason I asked you to come in. I flipped another page, then another, and then I saw it. A project code I recognized immediately. The Denver rollout. My project. Except, the numbers attached to it weren't the ones I remembered. Not even close. These aren't right, I said, looking up at him. The budget was lower. I had to fight for every dollar. I know, he said quietly. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Then why does this say? Because that's what was reported, he interrupted. Silence filled the room. I looked back down at the page, tracing the figures with my finger like that would somehow change them. They inflated it, I said slowly. After the fact. Richard didn't respond right away. That's one way to put it. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. One way? What's the other? He straightened, his expression tightening. Reallocation. Manipulation. Call it whatever you want. The result is the same. I closed the folder halfway, my mind racing. Why are you showing me this? Because you were close to it, he said. Closer than anyone else who's still here. That word stuck. Still. And Ethan? I asked before I could stop myself, thinking of Ethan Briggs and his $55,000 smile. Richard's jaw shifted slightly. Ethan's been involved in several high-visibility projects. That wasn't an answer. That's not what I asked. I know, he said. We locked eyes. And in that moment, I realized something that hadn't even crossed my mind the night before. This wasn't about bonuses. Not really. This was about numbers that didn't match reality. Money that moved where it shouldn't. And suddenly, my $4,200 didn't feel like an insult anymore. It felt like distance. Like I'd been kept just far enough away from something I wasn't supposed to see. I set the folder down on his desk. So what now? I asked. Richard didn't hesitate this time. I need you to come back, he said. Not want. Need. And do what? I asked. He looked at the folder, then back at me. Help me figure out how deep this goes before someone else does. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there in Chicago, in that too-bright executive office, staring at the folder like it might rearrange itself into something harmless if I gave it enough time. It didn't. What you're asking, I said slowly. That's not a come back to work on Monday kind of thing. No, Richard Halvorson replied. It's not. His honesty caught me off guard more than anything else that morning. I picked the folder back up, flipping through the pages again, but this time I wasn't just noticing inconsistencies. I was connecting them. Dates, approvals, budget shifts that seemed random until you lined them up. And when they lined up, they pointed somewhere. Or rather, to someone. I closed the folder and looked up. This isn't just bad accounting, I said. This is coordinated. Richard nodded once. That's my concern. Your concern? I let out a short breath. You're the CEO? And yet here we are, he said quietly. That landed heavier than I expected. For the first time, I saw the situation from his side, not as the guy handing out bonuses, but as someone who might have just realized his own company wasn't fully under his control. Why me? I asked again, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was genuine. You weren't part of it, he said. I raised an eyebrow. That's your qualification? It's the most important one right now. I couldn't argue with that. Still, something didn't sit right. And Ethan? I asked, the name coming out sharper than I intended, thinking again of Ethan Briggs and that effortless grin when he announced his $55,000. Richard hesitated. That was all I needed to see. He's in this, isn't he? I don't know, Richard said carefully. But his name shows up more than I'd like. I let that settle. Images started clicking into place in my head. Meetings Ethan insisted on attending, reports he offered to help polish, moments where he seemed just a little too informed about things outside his role. At the time, I chalked it up to ambition. Now, it looked different. You think he's skimming? I asked. I think, Richard said, choosing each word, that there are layers to this. And some of the people benefiting the most are also the least questioned. That sounded exactly like Ethan. I walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet Saturday streets below. From up here, everything looked clean, organized, like the city made sense. Funny how perspective works. What happens if you're right? I asked. Richard didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, then this isn't just an internal issue. I turned back to him. Meaning auditors, investigations, possibly legal action. The words hung in the air like a storm warning. And you want me in the middle of that? I said. I want you on the side that sees it coming, he replied. That was a good line. Too good. I studied him for a second longer, trying to figure out if this was strategy or desperation. Maybe both. And what about yesterday? I asked. The bonuses. He didn't flinch this time. They weren't random. I figured. We had to move money in a way that wouldn't raise immediate flags. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was almost unbelievable. So you underpaid the people who actually did the work and overpaid the ones who were already in positions where scrutiny would be complicated, he finished. I shook my head slowly. That's one way to keep things quiet. It was meant to buy time, he said. At my expense. He didn't deny it. Silence stretched between us again, thicker this time. I looked down at the folder, then back at him. You realize, I said, that from where I'm standing, I have two options. I know. I walk away. I continued. And this becomes your problem. He nodded. Or I stay, and it becomes mine too. Another nod. No pressure. No convincing speech. Just the truth, laid out flat. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it settle in. This wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't about $4,200. It was about whether I was willing to step into something that could blow up a company and everyone in it. I exhaled slowly. If I do this, I said, we do it my way. Richard's eyes sharpened slightly. Which is, no shortcuts, no protecting anyone. I don't care who's involved. For the first time that morning, something like respect crossed his face. Agreed. I held his gaze for another second. Then I nodded once. All right, I said. I'm in. And just like that, the worst bonus of my life turned into the most dangerous decision I'd ever made. The first thing I realized after saying, I'm in, was that there was no clean way out anymore. By Monday morning, I wasn't just back at the office in Chicago. I was walking into it with a completely different set of eyes. Same desk, same people, same coffee machine that always sounded like it was struggling for its life. But nothing felt the same. Hey, look who decided to stick around. Ethan Briggs called out as soon as I stepped onto the floor. That grin of his was still there. Easy, confident, like nothing in the world could touch him. Yeah, I said, setting my bag down. Couldn't stay away. It sounded casual. It wasn't. I watched him for a second longer than usual. Not obvious, just enough. The way he leaned back in his chair, the way people naturally gravitated toward him. He looked exactly like he had on Friday. That was the unsettling part. If he was involved, he wasn't worried. Which meant one of two things. Either he was innocent, or he was very, very comfortable. By 9 a.m., I was already in a closed conference room with Richard Halvorson. No windows this time. No glass walls. Just a whiteboard, a laptop, and that same folder, now expanded into something thicker. You weren't kidding, I said, flipping through new documents. This goes beyond a couple of projects. Richard nodded. We pulled everything tied to the same approval chains. Smart, I muttered. Or terrifying. Both. I sat down, leaning forward, scanning patterns. The more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't random manipulation. It had structure, timing, intent. Funds would inflate on one project, then quietly redistribute into another under a different department. Small enough shifts to avoid immediate detection, but consistent enough to build something significant over time. Who signs off on these? I asked. Mid-level and above, Richard said. But the patterns suggest coordination. I tapped a line on one of the reports. This signature, I've seen it repeated, I said, but always alongside different departments. Richard leaned closer. That's one of the names we're watching. I didn't recognize it. That bothered me. Who are we not seeing? I asked. He looked at me, understanding immediately. Exactly. The people doing the work weren't the ones behind this. Which meant the real control sat somewhere higher, or smarter. Around noon, I stepped out to grab coffee. Not because I needed it, because I needed to think. The office buzzed like any normal Monday. Conversations, keyboards, someone laughing too loud near the break room. Normal. Too normal. As I waited for the machine, Ethan walked in. Man, you look like you didn't sleep, he said, grabbing a cup. Didn't, I replied. Still thinking about Friday? He asked, lowering his voice slightly. There it was. I shrugged. Something like that. He leaned against the counter, studying me. You know, he said, this place, it's not always what it looks like. I froze for half a second. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me. That's supposed to mean something? I asked. He smirked slightly. Just saying, sometimes it's better not to dig too deep. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw it. Not confidence, not charm, awareness. He knew more than he should. Maybe not everything, but enough to be careful. I forced a small smile. I'll keep that in mind. Do that, he said, patting my shoulder before walking out. I stood there for a moment, coffee forgotten in my hand. That wasn't a warning. It was a test. And whether he realized it or not, he just failed it. I went back to the conference room and closed the door behind me. Richard looked up. Well, he asked. I set the coffee down and met his eyes. We're not just looking at numbers anymore, I said. His expression tightened. What do you mean? I took a breath. It's Ethan. Silence filled the room again, but this time, it wasn't uncertainty. It was confirmation starting to take shape. And deep down, I knew one thing for sure. This was about to get a lot messier. Saying Ethan's name out loud changed the room. Not dramatically, no raised voices, no sudden movement, but something tightened between me and Richard Halvorson. Like we'd both just stepped on a thinner ice. You're sure? He asked. No, I said honestly. But I'm not guessing either. I told him about the break room. About the way Ethan Briggs looked at me. Not like a coworker making small talk, but like someone checking how much I knew. Richard listened without interrupting, which told me more than any reaction would have. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Then we move carefully, he said. Carefully, I repeated. Or quickly, he held my gaze. Both. That's the thing about situations like this. People think the danger is getting caught. It's not. The real danger is what happens right before that. We spent the rest of the afternoon building a timeline, not just of transactions, but of people, who attended which meetings, who approved what, who suddenly started showing up in places they didn't belong. And Ethan's name? It didn't dominate the list. It threaded through it. Subtle, strategic, always just close enough to the center without ever sitting in it. That's not accidental, I said, tapping the board. No, Richard agreed. It's practiced. By evening, we had something that wasn't proof, but it was direction. Enough to know where to look next. Too much to ignore. Leave it with me tonight, Richard said finally. I'll pull a few more internal logs. I nodded, grabbing my coat. Don't contact anyone, he added. Especially not him. I wasn't planning to. That was true. But as I stepped out into the cooling air of Chicago, I couldn't shake the feeling that the situation had already shifted beyond quiet investigation. Because people like Ethan, they don't wait around to be discovered. Underscore. The next morning, Tuesday, everything looked normal. Too normal. Ethan was at his desk early, talking to someone from finance, laughing like nothing in the world was out of place. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. No smirk this time. No comment. That alone was enough to set something off in my head. I sat down, logged in, and tried to focus, but the air felt different. Heavier, like the room was holding its breath. At 10:17 a.m., everything broke. It started with an email. Company-wide. Subject line, mandatory audit review, effective immediately. I opened it. So did everyone else. Within seconds, the office shifted from routine to chaos. Conversations dropped, then surged. Chairs rolled back. People stood, whispering, guessing. I looked over at Ethan. For the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't smiling. Just for a second. Then it was gone. But I saw it. And that was enough. My phone buzzed. A message from Richard. It's moving faster than expected. We've triggered something. Triggered. That meant someone else knew. Or worse, someone else had been watching too. Another message came through, seconds later. Be careful who you trust. This might go beyond the company. I stared at the screen, then slowly looked up. Across the room, Ethan was already on his phone, speaking quietly, turned slightly away from everyone else. Not panicked, not confused, focused, like a man adjusting to a situation, not reacting to it. And in that moment, everything became clear in a way that didn't need words. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. The bonus, the meeting, the files, all of it, that was just the door. And I had walked straight through it. By lunchtime, the office didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a crime scene pretending to be one. People in Chicago were still sitting at their desks, still typing, still answering emails, but nobody was really working. Conversations had turned sharp, quiet, fragmented. Every glance lasted a second too long. Every whisper felt loaded. The audit team arrived just after noon. 3 people. Neutral expressions. No small talk. That was the first sign this wasn't routine. They didn't introduce themselves to everyone. Just went straight to the executive wing, badges already prepared. That meant this had been set in motion faster than Richard had expected, or by someone else entirely. I watched them pass, then glanced at Ethan Briggs. He didn't follow them with his eyes. He already knew. That thought settled in my gut like a weight. My screen lit up. A message from Richard Halvorsen. Conference room B. Now. No explanation. I stood up without saying anything and walked down the hallway. Every step felt louder than usual, like the building itself was paying attention. When I entered the room, Richard wasn't alone. 2 of the auditors were there, 1 woman, 1 man. Both calm, focused. The kind of calm that doesn't come from ignorance, but from already knowing more than they're saying. This is him, Richard said, gesturing toward me. He's been assisting me internally. Assisting. That was one way to put it. The woman stepped forward slightly. We'll keep this brief. For now. Her tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. Have you noticed irregularities in project allocations? She asked. Straight to it. Yes, I said. But they're not isolated. Explain. So I did. I walked them through the patterns, how funds shifted between departments, how approvals overlapped in ways that shouldn't happen, how certain names kept appearing without clear responsibility. I didn't mention Ethan. Not yet. The man took notes. The woman watched me. Not my words. Me. And when did you first become aware of this? She asked. I hesitated for half a second. Recently, I said. After reviewing internal reports. That was technically true, but not the whole truth. She nodded slowly, like she filed that answer somewhere for later. Good, she said. We'll need continued access to you. Access, not cooperation. That distinction mattered. They left as quickly as they came. The door closed. Silence. Richard exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This escalated, he muttered. No, I said quietly. This was already moving. We just noticed late. He didn't argue. I leaned against the table, arms crossed. You said we triggered something. I continued. What if we didn't? He looked at me. What if this audit was already coming? I added. That landed. Because if it was true, then we weren't ahead of anything. We were behind. And being guided. Understood. I went back to my desk, but I didn't sit right away. Ethan was gone. His chair empty. Screen locked. That alone was enough to spike my pulse. I checked the time. 1:42 p.m. Too early to leave. Too late for a casual break. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second before answering. Yeah. A pause. Then a voice. Careful where you step. My grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? Another pause. Then, you're looking in the wrong direction. Click. The line went dead. I stood there, the noise of the office fading into the background again, just like it had on Friday. Only this time, it wasn't confusion. It was something worse. Because now I knew two things. Someone was watching. And someone didn't want me looking at Ethan. I slowly lowered the phone, my mind already racing ahead. If Ethan wasn't the center, then he was either a shield or bait. And suddenly, this whole thing felt a lot bigger than one company or one bonus. I didn't tell anyone about the call. Not Richard Halvorsen. Not the auditors. No one. Because the moment you admit someone's watching you, you lose control of how people see you. And right now, control, even the illusion of it, was the only thing I had left. But I changed how I moved. Subtle things. I stopped checking my phone out in the open. Started noticing reflections in glass walls. Paid attention to who lingered just a little too long near conversations that didn't involve them. And most importantly, I stopped assuming I understood the board. Ethan wasn't at his desk the rest of the day. By 4 p.m., people had started whispering about it. Maybe he's with the auditors. Maybe he took the day. Maybe. Too many maybes. At 5:12, he walked back in. Same posture. Same calm expression. Jacket over his arm like he'd just stepped out for coffee instead of disappearing during a company-wide audit. Our eyes met for half a second. And this time, he didn't look away. He held it. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just aware. Like we were both waiting to see who would blink first. I looked down first. Not because I had to. Because I wanted him to think I did. That night, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I stayed late. Not working, just watching patterns. Who left early? Who stayed? Who checked their phone the second they thought no one was looking? Around 7:30, the office had thinned out enough to breathe again. That's when I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Ethan wasn't leaving through the main exit. He took the side corridor, the one most people ignored because it led to older parts of the building. Storage rooms. Archived records. Dead space. I waited 30 seconds. Then I followed. The hallway lights flickered slightly, that low hum of old wiring filling the silence. My footsteps sounded too loud, so I slowed down, matching his pace at a distance. He turned left. So did I. Another hallway. Narrower. Colder. And then he stopped. Right in front of a door I'd never paid attention to before. No label. No window. Just a keycard reader. He didn't swipe immediately. He stood there for a second, like he was thinking. Or listening. Then he reached into his pocket. My phone buzzed. Loud. Too loud. I froze. Ethan's head tilted slightly. Not fully turning. Just enough. Damn it. I stepped back instinctively, pressing myself against the wall, heart suddenly pounding harder than it had all day. The buzzing stopped. Silence again. A few seconds passed. Then I heard it. Beep. The door unlocking. I leaned just enough to catch a glimpse. Ethan slipped inside, and the door closed behind him. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Then I moved. Slow. Careful. I stepped up to the door, staring at the reader. No label. No indication of what was behind it. I reached out. Not a good idea. The voice came from behind me. I turned. One of the auditors stood at the end of the hallway, the same woman from earlier. Calm. Watching. How long have you been there? I asked. Long enough, she said. Her eyes shifted briefly to the door, then back to me. You're not the only one asking questions, she added. I lowered my hand slowly. What's behind that door? I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said something that made everything tighten again. That depends, she said, on who you think is in control. I frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now. Silence stretched between us. Then she stepped closer. You're being careful, she said. That's good. I didn't respond. But you're still assuming the wrong roles, she continued. Also dangerous. My jaw tightened. Then tell me what I'm missing. She studied me for a second. Then, the person you're watching, she said slowly, might not be the one you should be worried about. I felt that land before I could stop it. Ethan, I said. She didn't confirm, didn't deny, just held my gaze, then turned and walked away, leaving me there, in that narrow hallway, staring at a door that suddenly felt a lot more important than it had any right to be, and realizing something I hadn't considered until now. Maybe Ethan wasn't the player. Maybe he was the move. I didn't open the door that night. Not because I couldn't. Because I finally understood that some doors don't lead to answers. They lead to consequences you can't undo. I went home, but I didn't sleep. Not really. My mind kept replaying everything. The bonus, the files, the audit, the call, the hallway, the way Ethan Briggs looked at me, and the way the auditor had not answered my question. You're watching the wrong person. By morning, I stopped trying to force the pieces together. Instead, I asked a different question. Who benefits from me thinking it's Ethan? That changed everything. I got to the office in Chicago earlier than usual, before the noise, before the performance, and for the first time since this started. I didn't look at Ethan first. I looked at patterns. Who moved without being noticed? Who didn't react to the audit? Who already knew where to be? The answer wasn't loud. It never is. It was quiet, consistent, and it led me right back to the one person I hadn't questioned enough. Richard Halvorson. I didn't confront him immediately. I watched. That morning, he met with auditors twice. Normal. Took 3 calls behind closed doors. Also normal. But then, he signed something. Not unusual in itself, but the way he did it. No hesitation. No review. Like he already knew exactly what it said. That's when it clicked. Not the whole picture, but enough. I walked into his office without knocking. He looked up, surprised, but only for a second. You look like you figured something out, he said. I closed the door behind me. I think you knew, I replied. Silence. Not confusion. Not denial. Just stillness. That's a serious claim, he said carefully. Not really, I said. Just a simple one. I stepped closer, placing the folder, our folder, on his desk. You brought me in, I continued. Not because I was outside of it, but because I was believable. His eyes sharpened slightly. You needed someone clean, I said. Someone who could validate what you already knew without being connected to it. He didn't interrupt. Didn't defend himself. That told me more than anything. And the bonus? I added quietly. That wasn't about value. I shook my head. That was positioning. Now he leaned back slightly. Still calm. Still controlled. You're making assumptions, he said. Am I? I replied. I let the silence stretch. Then I said the one thing I hadn't said yet. You weren't losing control of the company. I met his eyes. You were controlling what gets exposed. That was it. The line. The moment everything settled into place. Because he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me, like I'd finally caught up. You're smarter than I expected, he said quietly. Not defensive. Not angry. Just honest. That hit harder than denial ever could. So what now? I asked. He stood up slowly, walking around the desk. No matter what you think you've figured out, he said, this doesn't end the way you think it does. That sounds like a warning. It's a fact. I held my ground. And Ethan? A faint smile. Ethan, he said, was exactly what you thought. I frowned. Visible, he clarified. Useful. A decoy. Of course. Everything snapped into focus. The bonus. The behavior. The access. All designed to pull attention in one direction. Away from him. I exhaled slowly. So the audit, I said. I didn't start it, he replied. That stopped me. But I knew it was coming, he added. And I made sure it would find what it needed to find. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to survive. Enough to redirect. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded once. Not agreement. Understanding. You don't need me anymore, I said. He didn't answer, because we both knew that was true. I turned, walked to the door, and paused for just a second before leaving. Next time, I said without looking back, don't underestimate the guy with the smaller bonus. I walked out. No one stopped me. No one followed. A week later, the headlines hit. Internal fraud. Mid-level executives removed. Ongoing investigation. Carefully worded. Controlled. Clean. And Richard Halvorson? Still in position. Of course he was. I never went back. Not to that office. Not to that version of myself. Because the truth is, I didn't lose that day, and I didn't win either. I just saw how the game was actually played. And once you see that, you don't sit at the table the same way again.